Well, we're excited today to be here with Thomas Rickert, and Thomas, of course, is a very notable Canadian actor. He's currently the executive producer at Code Film, a film company in Toronto that actually specializes in producing commercials. But the reason that we're here with him today is to talk about his career as a host of Polka Dot Door. Thomas, thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how you got involved in Canadian television.
I grew up out west, Vancouver, and in Winnipeg, and I did degrees in everything but fine arts. So I did a undergrad political science history, graduate in history, and when I moved to Toronto, I didn't have a lot of things to do, and I always wanted to do some acting. So I took acting classes, and after about 2 or 3 years of taking these part-time, I was given a scholarship by Ed Mervish that ran some wonderful theaters here in Toronto. His son runs them now. And that scholarship took me to Herbert Berkoff Studios in New York, and I studied with Uta Hagen and Bill Hickey and some fairly famous people, and learned how to sing and dance and do things a little bit like that kept me employed for at least 12 to 15 years when I came back.
What attracted you originally to children's educational television, and in what ways did it benefit your career as an actor?
I think with children's television, there's a few things that were attractive there, and one was just the honesty of the audience and the reception to the message, and it was the honesty. So if kids like what you're doing, they would applaud, they would be excited, and if they don't like what you're doing, they'd snooze, or maybe even boo or yawn or something like that. So I liked that instant feedback that wasn't colored by a whole bunch of we could call them social skills or social crap. And I like teaching them stuff too. I mean, as simple as telling the time. I mean, that was it was very exciting, to be able to not just entertain, which is what we do in movies and in a lot of other things, but actually to impart some knowledge. It was fun, gratifying.
Now, when I've researched your career, it's become apparent that you've had the opportunity to work with a lot of neat people. Can you tell us about the type of work that you've been able to do, not only both in television as an actor, but also now as a producer?
Well, as an actor, I did luck out. I did a lot of series. I did TNT with Mr. T. You remember him with Mohawk? And I did some movies of the week. Mary Tyler Moore played my mother-in-law, and James Garner played my father-in-law in a movie called Heart Sounds. Wendy Cruzan was my wife. I don't know if it was a great movie, but it was a fantastic experience, and working with Mary Tyler Moore was pretty fantastic too. So there were lots of movies like that. I did many commercials. I don't know how many, but well over 100. And I did song and dance and musicals, and because I could do all of those things fairly well. And I think that I think it's important for a Canadian actor to be able to pull all of those things off, because then you can eat. And musicals, of course, from a stage point of view, keep going and going and going. So that if you're a dramatic actor, I think it's very fulfilling, and you've got 3 to 6 weeks of work. And if you can do musicals, you can go on for. I never went on for years, but I think that the longest I did was 9 or 10 months, and then I'd move on to something else. And now as an executive producer, I make a lot of television commercials and work with lots of different directors. I worked with Jeff Cronenweth and Tim Cronenweth recently doing for Mountain Dew. And Jeff has been nominated as a DP for 2 Academy Awards, as DP for Girl with a Red Dragon Tattoo. He shot that. He also shot Social Network. I'm trying to think. He did quite a few different movies, and he's so the caliber of people I'm working with is exciting. mostly from a director and director of photography point of view. And then it takes me to places like that. We shot in Phoenix and in Santa Monica. I've shot recently in Budapest in South Africa for McCain's. And I was in Vancouver a few weeks ago doing Centrum, which is on air right now, and it's a 3-day shoot, and it shows lots of physical activities, extreme ones. So you have whitewater kayaking, you have people sort of mountain climbing. We used helicopters to get up there. You have bungee jumping in the city. You have all of these things, and you put them together and edit them. Others do all those skills, and it's kind of exciting. I like what I do.
The budgets for commercials have probably changed in the last 30 years, would you not say?
I would say, but I would also say from a television point of view. So commercials, if you look at what it might cost to do a television show, and you look at a commercial, the commercial shoots have a lot of money in comparison. So even while budgets have probably gone down because advertising is moving to other medium to get different audiences, whether it's internet or other things. But still, when there's still a big chunk of money that is spent when we go to these different places, or even in town here. The budgets might be less than they were before, but they're much more than a half hour of any Canadian television show for a 30-second spot.
Thomas, tell us a little bit about how you were first hired at TVO. Who hired you, and how did this job come about? And was it your first television gig even?
Not my first television gig. I guess commercials were, and I did a movie called Ticket to Heaven, which was my very first a television. No, that was a cinema job. And that was fortunately like 10 days. It was fantastic. Auditioning for at TVO, I went there and for the audition, and I remember going into the audition, and the cameras were set up, camera 1, 2, 3, just as we would when we were actually filming. They gave me the toys to relate to. Gave me some scripted lines, and so they'd call out different cameras so I could pay attention to the different cameras and deliver dialogue. But when I finished the audition, I realized I did an okay job, but not a great job. And I knew what my mistake was. I think Ted Coneybeare was there, and I forget who else. So I hung out outside, and I told them that I'd like to audition again. And this is something you would never ask a director or producer. It was, I guess, ballsy, and usually people would say no. But I knew I made some mistakes. And so I went back in, I auditioned again. And the mistakes that I made were when I was talking to the toys, when I was talking to Marigold and others, I never waited for a response. And that's the mistake that I made when I was in there, because I was a little self-conscious, because, at the heart of it, I'd never done these things before. So I'm talking to an inanimate object, but as a child would talk to an inanimate object, you should wait for that response. And I didn't. It was just that simple. So when I went back in there, I asked Marigold the questions, she would respond, and then I'd move on with the scene. And then they hired me.
Some have suggested that TVO was a pioneer in leading children's education. How would you describe the atmosphere of Polka Dot Door and the family of people you worked with?
I think it was a pioneer. I think that TVO cared a lot about their children's programming. And I think all the people involved with Polka Dot Door cared a lot what we were doing, because we were not only entertaining, but we were educating kids. We were telling them, we were giving them useful information, whether it was, telling the time when you're 3 or 4 or 5 years old. This is a skill set, and we were helping develop that, and in a fun kind of way. I also loved the idea of Pokeroo. The male host, myself or other male hosts, never ever getting to meet Polkaroo, and always finishing that scene by saying, "Oh, I missed him again." So it was a fun, delightful thing to do. And it was a good, warm atmosphere, supportive atmosphere. People cared about each other and about their job.
Now, truth be told, it would have been impossible for you to see Polkaroo because you were probably in that costume.
Oh no, you're giving it away. You're not. I'll tell you, so many adults never figured that out. Just never figured it out.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
the cat's out of the bag, the secret's out. The male host was in the Polkaroo costume. It's funny. I've interviewed a woman named Nina Keogh, and Nina was one of the first female hosts with Gordon Thompson in 1971.
Yes.
And there was a time in the early seasons of Polka Dot Door where the female host would get in the costume and the male host would interact with Polkaroo. And I actually have some vintage photos of Gordon Thompson, who later went on to do some soap operas.
Yes, Dynasty, I think.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I have some pictures of Gordon interacting with Polkaroo, and sure enough, Nina is poor girl is in the costume, which actually looked a lot different than the later costume. The original Polkaroo pretty much looked like he was wearing a pajama suit.
Yeah.
But
there was a out of the TV show, there was a spin-off live show that went across the country that I did for about 8 years, and with Cindy Cook and a few others. And in that show, the Polkaroo was a female, and in that show, which was far more musical, and because it was an adult audience, I mean, so in the TV show, you have kids in front of the TV, so we would do things in a certain way. But in the live show, each kid has to bring a parent, so you have to put a little bit of something in there for the adult audience too. So it was more musical, longer, and Polkaroo was a female in that too, and that was fun to do too. That took us to across Canada, to Edmonton, to Vancouver, to St. John's, to Labrador. I remember flying us around Labrador in a helicopter because the regular air planes didn't work with the scheduling and we were going to remote communities, and so this would happen every spring for about 2 or 3 months, and what a blast! I mean, it really was fun.
Well,
yeah.
You've just undergirded what I'm about to say here. Polka Dot Door is, without exception, a Canadian children's institution, and it's been fondly remembered by hundreds of thousands of people all over the world. When did you first hear about the show? Like, were you aware of it before you were in it? And what was the pitch to you to be involved? Was it your agent that got you the job? Bring us back to those kind of earliest memories, and what did you know about the show even before going into it?
Yeah, well, Polka Dot Door was around for at least 10 or 15 years before I got involved, so I knew about it. I didn't watch it very much because I wasn't the target market. But Dennis Simpson, when he did his last year, that's where the auditions opened up. And I think Dennis left on his own accord and moved to Vancouver, where he continued doing excellent sort of song and dance stuff. He was great at that. But when he left, they were auditioning. And so in some ways I replaced Dennis, at least for a while. And yes, the agent set it up because casting call went out. Submissions were made, and the people at TVO decided who they would call in, and I was lucky enough to be one of them. Yeah.
You already mentioned Ted Coneybeare, the late Ted Coneybeare. Give us your memories of working with Ted Coneybeare and what that was like.
Well, this was his baby. I mean, this was I wouldn't maybe saying his raison d'etre for a living. I'm not sure, but this was really important to him. I would say that Polka Dot Door was his family.
Now, when you say that it was his baby, it was really important. What kind of things did he do? What was his demeanor that gave you that impression?
That he was caring and respectful of the environment, and Bear, Marigold, the other toys, almost to the point of them being human beings. so that he cared about them the way I did in the audition and the way that I did in the TV show and in the stage show. But let's face it, if they were over here, sitting in the room, they're inanimate objects. So that I think that he cared, and not in a crazy kind of way, but in a there was a sentimentality there, and that I think that he read personality into them, and because he'd been developing this personality himself, so that he could pass it on to us. So that this was very, very important to him, and the message that we were imparting in the shows, right? All of these things were really well thought out on his part, and he really cared. I think it was the center of his life, and that this and we were lucky to participate in it and support it and bring it to life.
Did you ever have an opportunity to get to know him on any personal level? Was he simply simply a boss, or were you ever able to chat with him and get?
We chatted, but the chats would be at TVO or at there were some social gatherings, some sort of party things that usually had to do with work, and he was a smart and warm, caring guy. Again, with Ted, much like with children, with the audience, you didn't have to second guess what he was saying. He was pretty much an open book, and I think he gave that kind of feeling to the show too. So there was a reflection of his personality in the show.
What memories do you have being on the set? Any funny or memorable stories?
I'm not sure about fun or memorable. I'll tell you, I thought it was fairly. I was surprised at the amount of script that we were supposed to remember. It was hard. So we would do 5 shows over 5 days, but the way it worked was you would rehearse for 2.5 days, the 5 shows, and then you would shoot the others half a day each. And it was almost live to camera, much like probably like a soap opera, which might have given Gordon Thompson a leg up when it came to Dynasty, because you would do live to camera and it would be edited on the spot. Well, right, very close to you, with a director in another room, sort of doing cut as you went. So to remember 30 minutes or 27 minutes of dialogue and get through that in half a day was a difficult thing to learn right away. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to remember, if you rehearsed something on Monday morning and you were shooting it Wednesday afternoon, so it was a different process than I was used to.
So in the pictures of your mind, when you recall the set, do you remember the yellow shag carpet and the big red door? And
there's the big red door. Everyone would, and I remember going through the door. I remember lots of things. I remember many of the songs we did and why we did them. It was a good, fun, supportive atmosphere. I remember going through the door, and I think there was again, educating the kids, but we would take some clips, whether it was from NFB or other places, and one of them was on an owl, and there's a lesson to be learned here, the night owl and what they do at night and things like that. But owls don't see so well. They don't different things they don't do so well. And I think at the end I said, and they don't smell very well either. But I was supposed to mean that they don't smell their prey very well. But in fact, it sounded like owls stink. Anyway, there was fun and personality in the show, and they kept that part in.
So clearly you did, you were hired to do blocks of weeks. You do 5 episodes in a week. How many weeks of Polka Dot Door did you do?
I didn't do that many. I was there, I think, 1984, and that led into I think, about 8 years of doing the traveling show in the spring with mostly the same group of people, where they would fly. I think I was saying, to different parts of the country, from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I think so. One year we would specialize in the West Coast, where they'd fly us to Vancouver, and then there'd be we'd be driven to many other places, and that might take a few months. And then the next year they would take us to the East Coast, and we would go to many different places. I guess the bigger cities we might stay in for 2 or 3 days, and then we'd go to more remote places and hang out there for a day in each one.
So do you remember how many weeks you did in 1984?
I think it was, and it worked this way with everyone, is you would do 1 week, and then there would be a next group, and then there would be a next group. Right. So I think there was only 3 weeks of filming each spring, I'm remembering. And you'd have a male-female host for 1 week, and another one for the next week, and another one for the next week. And then I think my shows would come up on air every 13th week, and they'd run them in a row. And I think they would run them in the morning at some very early hour. I don't know, like whenever kids get up, 7 o'clock or something. And so every 13th week in the morning at that time, and then again at night at 6 o'clock.
Yep.
And that's how.
So just the 5 episodes you would have done then.
Yeah, I think that was it. And I know that they sold them to many other places. I know that certainly the States bought them, because we toured at least the northern states. But if you were an English-speaking country, likely you picked up Polka Dot Door. I think we introduced French that year too with Minu, the cat that spoke French. And we toured Quebec City and Montreal and a few other places like that.
Was there any Polka Dot Door merchandising that you remember from your time there, or even being out on the road, that you sold?
Oh, there was everything. Well, I don't know about everything, but yes, there were hats. There were T-shirts. There were, I remember autographing programs a lot. But I'm trying to think, and yes, there would have been tapes. Hey,
do you remember this?
Look at this. Where the hell did you get this? Yes, I do. Wow.
Now, our viewers can't see me right now, but of course I'm holding up the songs from the Polka Dot Door record. Now, this was produced in 1976, 77, I believe. Yeah. So we can talk afterwards. You might be a help to me, because I've been trying to get a hold of some of these people. Now, some of them are no longer with us. You mentioned Dennis Simpson, but there are some other people on here that I would love to get in touch with. One I've already been in touch with, and that's Rex Hagen. But there's Linda Kemp, and there's Shelley Summers, and Ken John Grant, and Nani Griffin I've gotten a hold of, and then Carol Ann Reynolds. And,
I know her name.
And then Alex Laurier. Do any of those names ring a bell?
They do ring bells. And I think that I can probably help you get hold of them. And I can get hold of them, or at least get their contact information via ACTRA.
Well, that would of course would be wonderful as we continue.
Because I'm a member of ACTRA, so if I give them my information, they'll provide me whatever I need to know.
Very cool. It's like the secret password, and you're in.
Yeah.
Who co-hosted with you during your week, and do you stay in touch with them?
Yeah, so her name was Susan, and I don't remember her last name. I was trying to remember that. It'll be on the tape when I give it to you. Her name was Susan, and then I know the live show was mostly Cindy Cook, which I think I mentioned to you.
Right, and actually Cindy and I are going to be doing an interview later on this month. I'm looking forward to chatting with her. As you look back on Polka Dot Door, now through the eyes of a producer, what kinds of observations have you made on the production of Polka Dot Door, and was it effective for the time?
It was effective for the time. It, from a production value point of view, I don't want to be too critical, but I am in glossy commercials, so I do understand lighting, even though it might not be too good right now. And I do understand these things. So Polka Dot Door did not have very much money. And I think that showed in the production values. So, and by that I'm not talking about the writing or music or those things, but I think that it could have used more time, or I would have liked to have had more time, so that 5 shows would have maybe be given things would have been spread out a little bit more. And I think yeah, just from a simple lighting point of view, maybe that would be the only thing that it could have used more money, but many other shows of the time period could too. When I look back and I see shows of that time, they're very often what they focused on was the message, and everything else was to support that, whether that message was an emotional one or a drama or something else. So sometimes production values were not as important as they seem to be now. And so I think that what Polka Dot Door did is it focused on what was important, and that's why it lasted such a long time. I think they did remarkably well with what they had.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and I think that's the consensus amongst a lot of people. Well, what I want to do now is a quick name association game, and these are always fun because these names, you might not remember any of them, or some of them they might ring a bell, and you might be able to connect the dots, and we always like to watch people struggle. So okay. Here we go. Here's some names. Ruth Vernon, does that name ring a bell?
It does, but it only rings a bell. I have a visual there, but that's all.
Ruth Vernon was the executive producer and the head of children's programming at TVO Ontario during that time.
No, I do know that, but I don't remember interaction.
David Moore.
No.
David Moore was one of the directors on Polka Dot Door.
Okay.
John Arpin.
Well, yes, but was that music?
You got it. He was the piano player on Polka Dot Door. Carrie Loring. Carrie Loring was also a host around your era.
Okay.
Heather Conkey.
No, sorry.
Heather Conkey did Polka Dot Door and did a lot of other shows on TVO. Jerry Mendocino.
Of course.
Yes. Did you do a live show with him?
Did a live show with him, and then we've seen each other outside. There were auditions. I don't think we were ever going for the same character. We're quite different, but we saw each other at auditions, and I think I was to his house once or twice, and some parties and things like that. Yes.
And finally, Al Fazan.
No.
He was an executive there at the time. Did you sense at the time that you were being part of a Canadian cultural phenomena? Like, obviously, Polka Dot Door had already had a following by the time you were a part of it. But did you sense at the time that you were contributing to something that was going to have an impact? And do people still recognize you today from the show?
I think at the time I knew we were having an impact, but I didn't know, and I know as part of something that had been around for a while and hopefully would be around for a longer period of time. But no, I didn't really think of it as sort of breaking new ground or doing any of those things. I do in hindsight. But at the time, no, we were doing good work. It was meaningful, and it was fun. It paid well, which was also good. But no, I didn't place it in a sort of cultural landscape. That's a hindsight thing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What was your other question? Sorry.
Do people still recognize you from the show?
I don't think so. I know that at the time they did, so it's kind of funny. You'd go into the bank or you'd do something else, and yes, and people would talk to me about it, or and that was strange and unusual. And when they did, you automatically knew that they must have like a 4-year-old or something.
Would children ever stop you, or would you overhear them saying, "Mommy, mommy, look"? It's...
Yes, yeah. Kids would turn around and do a point thing, and sometimes the parents would, pay attention, but sometimes not, just pull their kids away. But often kids did recognize, yeah.
How does it feel to have been associated with a show that has become just so iconic in Canadian culture?
I think it feels good. It's to be part of something that lasted as long as it did, to something that had that impact. and something that was really devoted to children. An American show at the time was Sesame Street, and it had razzmatazz and things like that. It had a broader focus, or maybe less focus. So it was entertaining, and parents liked it, as kids did. Polka Dot Door was really designed for children, so that parents might not have enjoyed it as much because it had a slower pace. It taught a little bit more, imparted a little more knowledge, but it didn't have those hidden jokes that would keep the adult audience engaged, because it was designed for kids, not for the wider audience.
Why do you think the Polka Dot Door became so iconic to generations? You said it yourself. There isn't, at least for the adult, there isn't much appeal. What was it about this little Canadian show that had a limited budget but a lot of ingenuity that made it so iconic and helped it last? Why do you think that happened?
I think that I think it was in part the simplicity of the show, which also translates into honesty, and talking to your audience as though they're one-on-one with you, and imparting some knowledge in a pace that was familiar and welcomed by children, rather than hitting them over the head with great big orchestration, or when we were talking about production values before, which in some ways can distract. So it was a simple, honest message that was given to them, and they would remember these things after a while. And so it meant something. We were helping open their eyes to the world, and whether that was telling the time, or learning about an owl in a zoo, or what a hydroelectric project was, things like that.
Final question. When you look back, what would you say is your favorite memory of the show?
I think it would be, my favorite episode of the show would always be Imagination Day. Because I think it was everyone's.
Because you got to play Pokeroo.
Pardon me?
Because you got to play Pokeroo.
Probably, but it was also Imagine, and the song was sort of lovely, and you'd close your eyes and it would be whimsical. Those are the things that I remembered and liked the most. And yes, because I got to play Pokeroo.
Well, Thomas, I know we'll chat for a couple of seconds after we hit the unrecord button here, or the stop button here, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview today. And I know that many are watching this interview being thankful that you did what you did, and are thankful for your contributions to Canadian educational television. And I'm always surprised at the subculture that exists out there that will watch this interview and will genuinely remember your episodes. And they're young children then, but now they're grown adults, and you played a part in their education.
And I'll give you those episodes, which you can do with what you want to do.
Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to viewing those, and to seeing you act and sing and do your thing. But
Okay.
thank you again for doing this interview. I'll chat with you in a couple of seconds, but I appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Travis.